Right, and we are live. So, hello everyone. I'm Sourabhi Dutta Roy, your project lead for the Story Project 12 by www.tellmeyourstory.biz. And I welcome you all to the fifth episode of the Women Without Names series. I feel extremely privileged to have with us today Dr. Surashree Shome, Dr. Somrita Urni Ganguly, and Ms. Haimanti Bagchi. Today's topic for the discussion is ecofeminism and the solitary struggle. Tell Me a Story calls for submission on the story prompt, that is, Women Without Names. Registrations are also open for our writing program, season 13. So, without further ado, let me begin now by introducing our panelists for the audience. Surashree Shome has been working with International Center for Research on Women, ICRW, for more than a year now. She has an experience of 20 plus years in the area of monitoring, evaluation, and research with various national and international organizations. After her doctorate degree in management of drought in Gujarat, a case study of Banaskantha district, she worked on the issues of women in informal economy, water and sanitation, urban housing, and disaster management. Currently, she's leading a course for youths across the country on sexual and reproductive health rights and its intersection with other issues. Some of her published papers include experiences and challenges of dealing with large sample, small and marginal farmers of Gujarat, problems while organizing, among many others. Welcome, Dr. Shom. Moving on, our next panelist, Somrita Urni Ganguly, is a professor, an award winning poet, and literary translator. She has a Fulbright doctoral research fellow at Brown University and is an alumna of the University of East Anglia's International Literary Translation and Creative Writing Summer School. Somrita served as a judge for the PEN America Translation Prize and the Kamala Das Poetry Awards, and an expert reader for the English PEN Translation Grant, the National for the Arts Translation Grant offered by the US federal government, and the National Translation Award. She is currently head of the Department of English at Manindra Chandra College under University of Calcutta and has worked on literary translation projects with Room to Read USA and the National Centre for Writing UK. Her work has been showcased at the London Book Fair, and she has read in cities like Bloomington, Bombay, Boston, Calcutta, Cove, Delhi, Hyderabad, London, Miami, Providence, and Singapore. Somrita edited the first anthology of food poems titled Kesadia and Other Adventures and translated three stories, Sarat Chandra Chattopadhyay, Fire Songs, Shakuni, and The Midnight Sun, Love Lyrics, and Farewell Songs, among other works. Welcome, Somrita. Right. Moving on, our last panelist for the day, Haimanti Bagchi, is a poet, artist, communication trainer, business storyteller, and independent researcher focused on creating awareness on indigenous culture, art, and literature. Her poems and short stories have been part of various anthologies and digital platforms like TMY's Review, Readomania, Scarlet Dragonfly, Ukyoto Publishing House, Shades Publishing, The Quill House, and others. Her latest poetry collection is Autumn of Life, published by Authors Press. Welcome, Haimanti.
Thank you.
Right. So moving on, to begin with, since ecofeminism is a relatively new term, I would like to request you to share your own perspective and idea of ecofeminism for our audience. Your connection with the word. Dr. Shom, would you like to begin?
Sure. Thank you, Sourabhi, for the introduction, and it was great to be part of this discussion. Uh, so, ecofeminism, the word itself says it's a combination of two words, ecology plus feminism. So, it means mainly the environment and feminism, or the you can say the women are interdependent. So whenever all the means different research that is mainly the studies by Vandana Shiva has told that they are very much interdependent to each other. Whenever we affect the environment, it has a direct impact on the gender, whether it is a gender health, whether it is gender livelihood, anything. So it gets impacted, even the education of the girls. So that's similarly when you are there is a violence against gender, it also has an impact on the environment. So these are two things which are very much interdependent. and that's why the word came as ecofeminism. And as you have see, means we have means we know that the Chipko Andolan it started from that particular theory that women who are guarding this food, they fought for the forest rights, and so that's why as my understanding of ecofeminism is it's a when we bring together the ecology, when we talk about ecology, when we talk about climate change, when we are talking about saving the climate, without women participation it is not possible. So that's what I think is ecofeminism, and that's why it is important. I'll stop here.
Thank you, ma'am. That was a wonderful. Thank you for opening it so beautifully. Moving on to Somrita, over to you.
Good evening, everyone, and hello to all our friends who've also joined our live stream on Facebook or will be watching this recording later. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. It always feels like homecoming whenever I am a part of the TMYS panel discussions. So thank you for having me here today, and thank you so much for that warm introduction, Shorobi. As Surashree already pointed out, so ecofeminism is an amalgamation of two concepts or two words. And she's looked at it from the social perspective of ecology and feminism. And because I'm sort of a person associated with the arts and literature, I look at it from a literary perspective. So if you think about ecofeminism from a literary perspective, it's a combination of two political ideologies or two literary and aesthetic movements or two different worldviews, that of eco criticism and that of feminism. So, if we have to understand ecofeminism, we have to understand each of these two movements first. What is feminism? Well, that's really like the subject of a whole different conversation or discussion. But to put it very very briefly, my understanding of feminism is that it's a politics, it's an ideology, it's a movement, it's an agitation, at the heart of which is the belief that there should be equal opportunity and equal dignity for all, gender and sex irrespective. If that is feminism, then what's eco criticism in literature? Now, Cheryl Black-Felty, who's, she's usually acknowledged as the founder of this field of study, eco criticism in the US. And if you allow me, I'm going to read out to you the definition that she that she introduces to us in the Eco Critical Reader. Um, so Cheryl writes, simply put, eco criticism is the study of the relationship between literature and the physical environment. Just as feminist criticism examines language and literature from a gender conscious perspective, eco criticism takes an earth centered approach to literary studies. Right? And then we have a parallel sort of definition emerging from the UK. There is a slight sort of it's almost negligible. People don't talk about it very much, but there is sort of like a slight difference between how eco criticism started in the US and in the UK. The US brand of eco criticism, is sort of more celebratory, whereas the UK, the British brand of eco criticism, I feel is sort of more like a caution or a warning. So this is Richard Kerridge, and if you will allow me to read his definition, this is something that he writes in Writing the Environment, and he says, the eco critic wants to track environmental ideas and representations whenever they appear to see more clearly a debate which seems to be taking place, often part concealed, in a great many cultural spaces. Most of all, eco criticism seeks to evaluate texts and ideas in terms of their coherence and usefulness as responses to environmental crises. So, now if we combine these two approaches, that of feminism and of eco criticism, we arrive at a third and a new way of looking at the world around us: ecofeminism. And at the root of this approach, I think, is the understanding and the acknowledgement of the fact that there are unequal power structures in the world, which has led to the subjugation of minoritized elements: women and nature, in this case, the case of ecofeminism, right? The female body and the land, right? Now, if you think of what the Bible tells us about creation or the story of creation, something that we were raised on when we were growing up, especially if you went to missionary institutions like I did, or if you study British literature, this is the kind of story that you grew up with. So it says Eve was born from Adam's ribs, second to him, subservient to him, right? And then similarly, the Bible also tells us something very interesting, and this comes at the beginning of the book of Genesis. And the book of Genesis tells us that God created man in order to give him dominion over fish and fowl and all other creatures. Now, if you read between the lines, it is no secret that the book of Genesis was written by a man. It was not written by a horse. It was not written by a dog. It was not written by a fish. So there is no certainty that God actually granted man dominion over all these other creatures. So, what seems more likely to me, even though it might sound controversial to some people, is this is what I think actually happened. That instead of us thinking of God creating man to give him dominion over every other creature, it's more likely that man created God, invented God, to legitimize, to sanctify, to justify the dominion that he himself has now exercised over all other creatures, right? The dominion that he seems to have usurped for himself over the fish and the fowl, the cow and the horse, the tree and the flower, right? So, especially when we think about an ecofeminist approach to literature, one of the things that often comes up is that the Judeo-Christian tradition, where which is where the book of Genesis comes from, it has really played havoc with human consciousness and man's consciousness, right? By giving him absolute power to suppress and subdue not just the earth, over which God has said you've got a full and free hand, you've got dominion, and also women, because the first woman, Eve, was created as a second thought, as it were, from one of Adam's ribs, right? So if you think of pagan cultures, if I don't quite like the word pagan, but if you think of pre-Judeo-Christian religious traditions around the world, nature and women played very important roles. We were worshipping the female principle. We were worshipping the yoni in India. We were worshipping the sun. We were worshipping trees. We were worshipping animals. So to that extent, I feel, like Christianity is a really anthropocentric religion, probably the most anthropocentric religion that the world has ever seen. By anthropocentric, obviously, I mean that a religion which is focused primarily and predominantly on the anthro, the body of the human, and in this case, as we know, the body of the man. And by destroying every other culture and religious tradition that has come before it, every other form of worship, pagan animism, as it was called, Christianity has probably made it possible for men to exploit both nature and women, right? Because there is this sort of total indifference to the feelings of natural objects, to the feelings of women, to the feelings of anybody that belongs to a minoritized realm, right? So I think to understand ecofeminism, one of the first things that we have to do is acknowledge that domination is probably one of the most brutal realities of a human human relationship or a human nature relationship, right? And the ecofeminist writer, the ecofeminist reader, the ecofeminist text will be looking in this idea of domination certain repetitive patterns. What patterns? The repetitive pattern in which the earth, which is a symbol of fertility and a symbol of fecundity, the earth, which is the nourisher and the nurturer, the earth, which is the provider and the protector, the earth, which is the mother and the daughter, has been as abused as a woman who fulfills all of these roles for centuries, right? So, an ecofeminist reader or an ecofeminist writer, an ecofeminist text will be looking at the um, price of phallocracy, right? The price that has to be paid by women and nature, how defenseless women and nature have become in the face of this brutal, blatant attack, in the face of this brutal, blatant onslaught, which is being carried out by capitalist patriarchal structures that have rendered women and nature helpless, defenseless, used, and abused. Right? So I just want to, for the first section of our discussion, if you will just allow me to read one other passage. This is by Caroline Merchant, who's sort of leading ecofeminist theorist of our times, of contemporary times. And she says this is something that she's written in her introduction to the reader called Ecology. And she says, yes, she says, it was the male system created 5,000 years ago, not capitalism or socialism, that gave men the power to sow both the earth and women. The Iron Age of the second sex began, women were caged, and the earth was appropriated by males. The male society, built by males and for males, that took over running the planet, did so in terms of competition, aggression, and sexual hierarchy. Right? So it is this sense of dominance, this structure of the survival of the fittest, the law of the jungle, this idea of pollution that we that we as ecofeminists or ecofeminist writers, ecofeminist readers will address. Right. So these were sort of, Sourabhi, you were asking about basic concepts. So these are, I think, some of the basic ways in which we can think about ecofeminism today. And we can talk about texts once we've heard from Haimanti and more specific examples.
Thank you, Somrita, especially for bringing in literature into the discussion. Moving on, over to you, Haimanti.
So, thank you so much, first of all, for giving me this opportunity that I can represent the indigenous world through this particular panel discussion. So, adding up to Somrita ma'am's, literary perception of what ecofeminism is, it I would just narrate it according to my understanding. So ecofeminism to me, it is a aspect that asserts that capitalism reflects only paternalistic and patriarchal values. So this notion implies that the effects of capitalism have not benefited women as much as men, and has led to a harmful split between nature and culture. So it is not only because women are female or feminine that they relate to nature, it is also because there are similar states of oppression. Just like Somrita ma'am was saying, in this similar states of oppression, and it is done by the same male dominant forces. So some discourses even link, women specifically to the environment because of their traditional role as nurturer, caregiver, and ecofeminists following in this line of thought believe that these connections are illustrated through the coherent, socially labeled values associated with femininity, such as nurturing, which are present both among women and nature. There is also spiritual ecofeminism. So that is another branch of ecofeminism which calls this as earth-based spirituality, which recognizes that earth is alive and that we all are interconnected community. Spiritual ecofeminism is, not specifically linked to any particular religion, but it is centered around values like compassion and non-violence. So there's another branch of ecofeminism, which is cultural ecofeminism, which celebrates the relationship of women and the nature. So through different forms like revival of ancient rituals, which is centered on goddesses worship, the moon, animals, and all the elements of the earth. So basically, cultural ecofeminists tend to value intuition, care, human nature relationships more. So I will stop here and probably will take further. I'll explain through different examples as we go forward through this panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Haimanti. Ecofeminism, as already established, can be defined from various reading sides, aspects of it. But the one thing that stays is that it is an amalgamation of two different words, which is feminism and environmentalism or ecology. So the past few decades have witnessed an enormous interest in both the women's movements and the environmental movements. Already, as you established by all three of our panelists, that analogies are used to connect the two issues. Feminism and environmentalism go hand in hand. To begin with you on this, Dr. Shom, what would you say makes the environment or ecology a feminist issue specifically, and what are some of the alleged connections between the domination of women and the domination of nature?
See, yeah, so there is a whole lot of discussion that has been initiated after last UN discussion on climate change, where the woman's role in climate change has been means emphasized. But what happened that in all the discussions they have mentioned about that because of the climate change there is an impact on women. That has been an established fact, and which I will try to give some examples during the discussion. But there is not much talk about, still now, not much talk about inclusion of women in any climate change actions that is going on. Most of these actions that we are talking about still now is at a very large level where the participation of people is not there, whereas it's mainly the participation of government, which is mainly a top-down approach. So when there is a top-down approach, the women's participation decreases further. Participation of women in policy making in the climate change issues is negligible, not only in India, anywhere in the world. So women, in a way, is means is most, we say that it's the climate change will aggravate the whole means the impact. The poor would be much more poorer, the vulnerable would be much more vulnerable. So women who are mainly means vulnerable, the poor women who are most vulnerable to any type of changes, the impact would be higher on them. Let's talk about simple thing like water. Because of climate change, there is droughts, there is constant droughts, there is rainfall which is not very constant. Rainfall, which is rainy days, has decreased, but the groundwater recharge, that's why has decreased. So in a way, there is not much water. So the drudgery of women has increased with that. because the woman is responsible to bring water for the family. The drinking water, the responsibility of drinking water is with women. Drink it. So the woman have to take care of the water. If she is walking, means she have to means walk for something 2 kilometers to bring water. Sometimes it's the girls. It's means if there is a responsibility of uh, let's say the of women. Similarly, it's the responsibility of a girl also. So girl also have to, means she have to leave the school to bring the water for the family. It's not the boys. Mostly it is the boys, the girls, and the women's responsibility to bring the water for the family. Similarly, the food. Similarly, the forest produce. All these are the activities of a woman in any rural household, and in any, you go to any area, whether it is Africa, whether it's India, whether it is South Asia, you go to South America, everywhere women is responsible for food, for drinking water, uh, and if you can just give me a second. Sorry. So yes, it is for the food, it is for the drinking water, it is for the child care. For all these three cases, woman is the responsible person in the family. Also, so for the child care also, she have to take the responsibility. Another thing that has came up is, means when these type of climate change, whenever there is a disaster, there is a large scale migration that happens, and when the migration happens, it is mostly a selective migration. When the only the men move out from the houses, they move to the urban areas, and the woman remains there in the house to take care of all the all the responsibilities of the house. So in these cases, the woman is again, means her duties to the family increases. That means it's not only just taking care of the food, means she have to bring the food also. She have to bring the fuel also. She have to bring the water also. She have to take care of the children also. And the uh, the problem is that in all these things, woman is nowhere, is means everywhere. Woman rarely owns any assets. It's not the woman really owns the land. Woman rarely owns the house. Woman rarely owns the vehicles. So the movement of a woman is not as good as the men, or getting any type of, like, all our programs, if you see, are linked with assets. Even to get a money from a bank, you need to have an asset. So woman is mostly the one of the most impacted one. When men move out of the family, women really have to take care of the family with whatever the resources she have, and she really doesn't have any resources. And in this case, the woman is the most impacted one. And if we talk about, let's say, when you are talking about that uh, the see, so that's why when we are talking about the domination of between the domination of women and the domination of nature, so in both cases, so as I have said, that woman rarely owns anything, neither the house nor neither the land, but she is responsible for everything. So in that case, so she means through generations, women have, even in these circumstances, it's not now that the woman is not owning anything. It's even in before also, the woman rarely owns anything. So from generation, woman knows how to be biodiverse, how to means when you see the kitchen garden concept, where the woman is mainly uh, grows a small vegetable in her near her kitchen and all those, it is mainly to bring the biodiversity in her house. So biodiversity on the plate. Whereas if you talk about when we have moved towards let's say towards the whole commercialization of the crops and all those, we have moved towards the monoculture, where there is a large scale production is happening. And with this, the biodiversity has also decreased. And also with that, means along with the large scale production, It's also many type of seeds that are coming in, like the GMO seeds and all those, and those have a problem. The problem is that those seeds could not be used second time. Whereas in our traditional system, the seeds that we used to grow, so the woman used to preserve it. The woman's role in agriculture is much more to maintain that biodiversity, to bring variety on your plate. So the variety is not just rice or something dal, it is also the vegetable, the colors of the vegetable that makes the food, food means complete. Your plate should be colorful. It should not be having it two colors. So that's what was making it means colorful. So woman, it's the women who are bringing in this. So these knowledge and all those are also going down with monoculture and all those, because when we say that as the land is owned by a man, he decides. It's not the woman who decides. So when a man decided, has gone for the commercial cropping, she lost the power of even to 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 say that I need a biodiversity. I don't need just one type of crop. I need a different type of crop. So all these things has gone. So that's why I felt that the inclusion of women, the listening to women's voices is very important. And when we are talking of listening to women voices, it starts from means your panchayat. It starts from your home. It's not only the panchayat. I will say start from your home. Listening to women, listening to her these smaller needs, because she is much more responsible. She knows the need of her child. She knows the need of her family. So that's where the women's uh, the voices should be heard. But the problem had happened that in our whole system of democracy, somewhere the women voices are never got included, because women has really participated. Still now, the participation of women in local democracy is very low. If you look at the means we are now talking about 33% reservation. Huh? So we are not. We are talking about it, but why there is a 33% of reservation is required? Why we could not say that women participation why is not there from before? That means that somewhere in the family she is not allowed to go to the to participate. Now it is possibly that they are saying that you have to participate. Otherwise, women and men they have the same right in the democracy. They have the same right to the participation. But her responsibility at home, and also the perception of people that women can't they can't decide on it. They can't talk about it. They don't know about the livelihood. Something those decisions has really impacted women's participation in the whole thing, women's inclusion of women voices in the whole thing. I have worked across India, and somehow whenever I have talked to women, and I have found they have a very basic need, and those basic needs has been ignored in any panchayat system, in any development program. They have talked about simple thing like a small health system or health care that has not been even taken care of. We are still not willing to talk about the menstruation. Why not? And in a disaster like situation, when women can't talk about it, the impact on her is highest. And just because of climate change and all those, number of disasters would be increasing. That has been already been mentioned by World Bank, that our disaster means the like in 1970 whatever the disaster number of disasters which has increased, near about one third of it has increased. Like in 70s, if there are 3 droughts, now there are 5. So that means the disasters is increasing. That means the impact of women would be increased. And that means that the women vulnerability would be increased. And with that is their their rights would be further deteriorated. So we have to include women voices somewhere. We are we are trying it. We still means like there are certain policies where means many organizations have tried. At least the assets should be named in the name of husband and woman. There are certain approaches that has happened, but still it is means I think that we are still at a very basic level. And it's not only in India. That's again I'm emphasizing, it's not a story of India, it's a story of across the world, where women's participation in 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 democracy or in politics is equally important. Inclusion of women voices are equally important, because women includes the voices of a family, of a child, of a basic need. And that's why it is very important that we should include them in any decision making. So I will stop here, and certainly there are many other questions. So I will like to emphasize other issues of climate change there. So yes, and thank you. And it's great to hear Sumitra and Haimanti, because this is a totally a different perception that I'm hearing, and my perception is totally different because I come from an environmental background, and my I came from the means working with the rural areas and all those. So those are totally different. But it's great to hear both of you. Thank you. I'll
Same here.
stop here.
Thank you for that, ma'am. Moving on to Somrita. As a literary translator, an ardent reader, writer, and professor, and also a mentor for creative writing, how do you perceive eco-feminist narratives in modern literature? It would be great if you could discuss the prose or poetry from well-known authors whose writing falls under the genre, irrespective of their personal involvement in the cause.
Sure, thanks, Shorby. But before I go into that, this is something that Surashree mentioned, and for me, it was less of hearing something new, what she was saying to us, and more of saying, "Oh my God, but that's what we talk about in literature." And this is a reflection of what is going on in real life, and just sort of to reiterate the fact that literature is not divorced from life, that art at the end of the day is going to highlight the crisis that is going on at the ground level, right? I mean, and you talked to Shirshri about um menstruation and women, and just something which I've been thinking of over the last 2 or 3 years, since let's say the menstrual cup became popular. I don't know if you've noticed, but there is this whole agenda of shaming women for the kind of female hygiene products that they use, as if that is the leading and the only factor in the environmental crisis that we face today. Whereas that is, if you actually look at the statistics, a minor fraction. Not that we shouldn't do our role in trying to curb that minor fraction, in trying to work better, think harder for what will work in favor of this environment, but I don't see this agenda of trying to shame the capitalists when they're manufacturing the Coca Colas and the Pepsis. I don't see this agenda in shaming all the oil spills. I don't see this agenda in the use of private jets and, all sorts of fancy cars and vehicles that we have at our disposal, things which are much bigger factors in leading through the crisis that we are faced with today, right? So so even there, I see there is this sort of patriarchal agenda in sort of putting the blame on the woman. Oh, your female menstrual hygiene products are very, very damaging for the environment. Yes, because I have not been traveling on private jets for the last 100 years. That's why that has not caused any pollution. Only our products do. I mean, that was an aside. It really makes me angry and really makes us see the connection between who is in power, who is in charge, who's creating these ads, who's making the policies. Right? So as Surashree was saying, we need participation. We need a participatory form of governance. The man will find out that the well is drying up much, much after the woman does, because she's the one that is having to walk for miles and get the water, and she's the one that is having to look for alternate resources, right? So just to link, because Shirshi said these really interesting things about water, about women protecting or preserving seeds. And then I was thinking of this film. I know, Shirabhi, you said prose or poetry, but I think this is a very, very fun film to talk about as well. Read it as poetry or as a prose text. So this is called Mad Max Fury Road by George Miller. This is the fourth film in the Mad Max series. Now, this one is very, very interesting because at the beginning of this film, what we see is sort of like a post Third World War situation, right? A post nuclear attack sort of a situation. So, a world post an apocalypse which has been man made, that sort of a situation. So, obviously, around us, what we see is a desert land, a wasteland. There is no green, there is no human life. But in this desert land, there is a citadel. This is not to sort of give away the story of Mad Max Fury Road. If you haven't watched it, I strongly, strongly urge everybody to do it. But there is a citadel, and this citadel is sort of um, manned, governed by this one fascist dictator whose name is Immortan Joe. Obviously, there's that pun on Immortan and immortal as well. So Joe has survived, but you don't really quite survive a nuclear attack, right? So his body is deeply bruised, very, very scarred. But Joe does something. He has kept, as it were, a harem with 7 women who are the best of the breed. These are the 7 women that he goes and impregnates from time to time so that they can birth healthy babies in this post apocalyptic, post nuclear war world that we have. The moment you think of that, you think of how over time we have, think of our breeding practices, whether that's in the animal world or even today when you think of, the concept of designer babies, which is very, very popular in certain East European countries where people with more capital from West European countries or the US are paying to get designer babies that are sort of manufactured. And then there are poorer people that are giving their wombs out just for some money. So, right, so there is that sense of breeding. So who can counter Immortal Joe? In this film, the answer lies with a woman. Her name is Furiosa, played by Scarlett Johansson. Fantastic. So Furiosa goes and meets a group of very, very aged women who have been protecting seeds from a pre-nuclear world. But they are not able to grow these seeds because the land is now completely corrupt and devastated. This is a wasteland, so no green grows over here. So, how do we grow these seeds? To grow them, we have to go back to the citadel where there is Immortan Joe, who is, hoarding the milk and hoarding the water, etc. Right? So, I won't go into the entirety of this story, but to just sort of highlight how we can read a text from an ecofeminist perspective. On the surface of it, this is a film about adventure. This is a superhero film, as it were, right? This is a film about people fighting. But behind all of that, when you start looking at it between the lines, there is this deep strain, as it were, of the need for women to rise, of the need for women to protect themselves and the world that they are living in. Right? So this Furiosa figure, the role played by, sorry, not Scarlett Johansson, this was by Charlize Theron. So this Furiosa figure then becomes like the second Christ. We've all heard in literature about the second coming of Christ, except that this time Christ is not male. Christ is a woman, and the woman is the new savior, the woman is the new Messiah. Right? So if you also, let's say, if you look at a text like Goblin Market by Christina Rossetti, again, this is written in the, Christina Rossetti was contemporaries with Charles Dickens. She was contemporaries with Thomas Hardy, obviously her brother Dante Gabriel Rossetti. So she's a Victorian writer. Back in the day, we weren't talking about ecofeminism. We weren't even talking about feminism for that matter. Feminism came in a little later. But the roots of what will give birth to the movement were already there. Right? So if you look at a text like Goblin Market, what is it saying? Again, the need of a sisterhood to come together to protect one another and to challenge the brotherhoods of the world that have taken to abusing and raping the women just as they have taken to abusing and raping the world of nature around them. Why? Because this is the Victorian time, so 19th century, late 19th century, by when industrial revolution is a reality. Industrial revolution is one of the first and biggest factors that, led to what we are now seeing today as this major ecological, environmental, climate crisis, right? So, who do we challenge? How do we challenge? We challenge these brotherhoods of goblin men by becoming a sisterhood, by becoming a collective, by becoming these women who will turn into the second coming of the Christ, the messiahs of the new world, right? Another text, if you think of it, Macbeth, for instance. Now, we don't really talk about Macbeth as a play that has ecofeminist connotations, but if you wanted to, you could. Because what is happening in Macbeth? In the very first scene, you have these three witches. They meet on this barren, deserted landscape. And at the end of that scene, they say, "Fair is foul and foul is fair, hover through the fog and fill the air." So they are talking about a world that is polluted. Hover through the fog and fill the air. The air is polluted. And then the rest of the play is about how this pollution intensifies. Because there is a certain order that the Elizabethan people believed in. And in that order, you had ranks. So there is God and the angels, and then there is God's direct descendant on earth, who's the king, and then you have the king's subjects, and then you have the world of animal and plant kingdom, flora and fauna, right? So, what does the protagonist do? He commits an act of violence against his king, which is also, therefore, an act of violence against God. So the world of order is now in a state of disbalance. It has to be balanced out, which is why an impurity like Macbeth will eventually have to be removed from the play. And the play, which begins with fog and fill the air, will end in Act 5, Scene 7 with the rising of the sun. So, yes, Macbeth is a play about moral pollution, political pollution, about turmoils that are sociological in nature, but it is also a play about actual environmental pollution, which is being further intensified by these characters that are trying to reverse the cosmos which God had created and going back to a state of chaos. Right. So there are lots of texts like that. If you think of Seamus Heaney, for instance, um, so Irish poet, and he compares women in his poems to his motherland, and how there is this direct parallel between how the English, that were the empire, the imperial force on their life, was abusing the Irish motherland, and in the same way, the soldiers were abusing the Irish women. Right, so that is the way in which, since you were asking for instances, if you think of how all the texts that have been written on the Magdalene laundries, or if you look at texts that revolve around Mary Magdalene, about the concept of the fallen woman, the church and the church's idea of what a woman is or is not supposed to do. And then you extend it to other religious identities as well, right? Because we're living in times where, so, earlier I had talked about how, quote unquote, pagan traditions were more progressive. But by now, in 2023, I think every religion has done and is doing its worst to exploit both women and the world of nature. Right. So, yeah, just some of those examples. If you want, I'd be happy to discuss more. But I mean, I don't want this to become very sort of like text heavy, because I realize some people are not from a literary background. So, just to show you how you can look at these two parallelly: the abuse of women, the exploitation of women, and the abuse of nature, and how these are, deeply and intrinsically related.
Right. Thank you, Somrita. I'm sure that people might find something new to watch or read from your list. if they haven't already. Um, Moving on to Haimanti, indigenous art fountains from the green roots. So, would you please comment on the reflection of ecofeminism on indigenous art and how the culture inspires both gender and ecology if one is observant?
Okay, so the ecosystem has been significant element of tribal narratives, like we were all discussing about it, right? So I remember from this conversation, there is this Native American indigenous community called Hopi Indians. So their ecological narrative says that they used to live below the surface of the earth, and there is a cyclical pattern of creation and destruction of the world. So this belief system will some or the other way be similar. We can find it in different tribal groups as well, different tribal communities all over the world. So this suggests that their closeness to nature, partaking in the indigenous knowledge systems, which have been passed on from generations through various narratives. And one of the major narrative is the rich art forms um, from the tribal communities, from the folk communities. So the famous Gond art of central India, for example, is full of motifs and themes that symbolize dependence on nature. For example, like the paintings we can see there of flora and fauna, of peacocks, birds, crabs, lizards, lions, all kinds of animals, fish. And on the other hand, we can see mahua tree. Now, Mahua tree is symbolizing tree of life, which again symbolizes the Gond cosmology and the daily life which revolves around nature. So these paintings denote how these popular myths and legends and folk tales were kind of communicated through paintings. And these paintings are also made of natural colors, which were extracted from plant sap, charcoal, cow dung, different types of flowers, soil. So that further clarifies the fact that tribal paintings and art forms represent themselves as an entity of nature rather than an external force that exploits nature. So you can also see, I was just telling about tree of life, right? So tree of life is another uh, common motif you can see in Madhubani paintings, in Rogan paintings as well, having this philosophy that a giver, a garden, a sustainer of life, tree is the basis of life on earth. And every one of us, somewhere or the other, is connected through trees. So some other elements we can find in Bhil art, Warli art, Sorai and Sora art, for example, are the geometrical figures like dots, triangles, circles, semicircles, polygons. These are basically symbols of elementary energies of the mortal world. So it represents the harmonious coexistence of humans, animals, plants, etc. So basically, these paintings are celebration of interweaved association of um, human life and nature. Let's take another example of Madhubani art. Okay, so here we would notice many layers of marginalization as well as struggle. So in higher caste Hindus, like caste and Brahmin families in Mithila. So it happens generally in Mithila region of Bihar. And so these families who are high caste people, they make Bhitti Shobha and Aripana. Now, Bhitti Shobha is somewhat kind of a mural made outside the walls of their homes, and Aripanas are done on the surface, on the ground. Okay, so these are different kind of forms of art which they use in different austerities. So now we have to understand that why they were introduced at all. So as you know that according to patriarchal norms, women were not allowed to go out of their homes, and Mostly they were inside their homes doing activities of either cooking, cleaning, doing all the household stuff as housewives. And uh, during these special practices, they engaged themselves in art to let out or to share or communicate their feelings, right? So that actually gave rise to this kind of an art form. However, will in the contemporary times, when we see Madhubani art, it has changed a lot. Now we can see different kind of motives. Not only now women are talking about through their art, not only they are talking about the different household works they are doing, they are also expressing their consciousness, their collective consciousness, their universal experience and individual experience as women. So that is a stepping stone now, and women are expressing themselves and are able to express themselves worldwide through this Madhubani paintings. Now, there is a German anthropologist called Erika Moser. So, she actually encouraged Dalit women to embrace this art form. Before this, Dalits, or lower caste people, were not allowed to do or engage in any way in Madhubani art. But this person, Erika, she you know uh, imbibed this or encouraged these women, Dalit women, in that area in 1970s, and that gave a new beginning of social acceptance and financial independence of these women who were Dalits. They were destitutes, and they were not. You know because they were so poor, they were not having any financial background, good financial background, so they could now engage into economic activities. They could now gain finances. And plus there is another good thing, that their oral history they could document on the walls everywhere, wherever they wanted. They in bold compositions and figures. If you see Madhubani paintings, the colors are very bold, the outlines are very bold. So the patterns which they follow even till date is the conventional tattoo pattern, which is also called bodhna, right? So that already thriving community in that area, art community in that area, certainly gained significance. So here we see different layers of marginalization. First, the nature uh, is always there in these paintings. Then the women who were not allowed to go out of their homes. Then the Dalit women who were doubly marginalized because of their caste. Right? So, yeah, I'll end it here. Thank you.
Thank you, Haimanti, for touching upon so many varied forms of art. Moving on to Dr. Shome. India has always been an agricultural country, but the word farmer produces a very male image in mind. So, would you like to tell us about women's role and contribution in the Indian agro system, and how does the belief, superstitions, and wisdom of women at the grassroots affect the rollout of environmental research? You're on mute, ma'am, if you could.
Thank you. This particular topic is very near to my heart because I'm working in this from last 20 years. And farming, as we say farmer, certainly it's a word that resonates with men. But the meaning of farmer is a person who cultivates land and animal. So if we talk about that, uh, that farm why farmer, when we talk about a farmer, why it is a word that is means produces a very male image in mind, because wherever you see them, wherever, means there are two major things: is the asset, who owns the land, who owns the agriculture land? It's the men. And the second place where they sell the produces. Who sells the produces? It's the man. He brings the money back to the home. So certainly, land and the money, all the economic part of it is means with farming is linked with men. But as for me, as I have seen across India, across many countries, farming is always a family business. Is nowhere the farming could be only a male business. Anywhere where it is a smaller or a bigger farmer, if you talk about a very small farmer, is the husband and wife, both of them work on it. So when we talk about it, that what are the roles of farmer? Before, let me give you a very small that that India, which is mainly a agricultural country, we say it's where the 60% of the Indian population works in agriculture and contributes about 18% of the Indian GDP. And we say that 80% of women are engaged and depend on agricultural development in India. So how much is this woman as a woman contributes in the agriculture? This 33% of the women comprises of agricultural labor, and 48% of the women employed farmers in India. So if you can say that self-employed women, whenever we do the census and all those other surveys, we found that uh, self-employed is means they are working in their own land. So 48% of the women are workforce in self-employed and farmers are women. So it is near to equal that women equally participate in their own land. Uh, and now when there is a selective migration is has increased, when our ship are migrating to the cities, the women are the responsible part, responsible for means the land, the agriculture. Uh, and uh, and that agriculture doesn't include just the farming. Agriculture also includes livestock rearing, horticulture, post harvesting operation. So there is not just means also the forestry, also the collection. So all these things are the part of uh, your women's work. Gum collection, which is seen in some of which I have surveyed with my colleagues in Gujarat. It's an occupation of a woman only. They goes to the forest, they collect these gums and they comes back. So because these are the work of women. Similarly, when you have talked about the agriculture, weeding, we talk about the weeding. Weeding is a very it's a very tedious work. Very tedious work means you have to go every 3 4 days. You have to take out the weeds and all those. So machine can't do it. It's the women or the people have to do it, because in between there is some weeds and you have to take it out. Now certainly there are pesticides and all those, but pesticides have its own impact on the land. But otherwise weeding is done by uh, women. Pruning, pruning when and it's a very, when we talk about pruning, it is not just cutting the top of the plant. Pruning is means just cutting the top of the plant. And uh, uh, and when we say about pruning means हमने we cut it and then we don't throw it, we eat it. सरसों का साग, the simple thing of pruning. सरसों का साग is mainly the top of the mustard plant. And when they prune it, they don't throw it, they bring it back, they cook it. Similarly, there are many other smaller sags. Those are the part of weeding and pruning, and that's done by the woman. So woman's role here, and frankly speaking, neither the pruning nor the weeding still has been done by any machine. It has to be done by the woman only. Similarly, when we talk about agricultural laborers, so women are usually, even though we statistics say that only 30% of the women in the agricultural labor sector is women, but it's more higher than that. Because what happens that when any big farmer employ labor. He employs the couple. He doesn't employ just a woman. Usually, in many places, he employs the family. So, in that way, men and women, both of them are working in the field. And when they both of them are working in the field, the money usually is paid to the male member of the family. So that's why the woman's contribution in this is not visible. So in some cases, the woman they usually contribute directly, that is paid. But in many cases, the woman is not directly paid for her labor. Working in some other field as a labor, she is not paid. Her husband has been paid. So in that case, that's again remain invisible. We don't count them. Similarly, the forestry work, the collection of fuels is not counted. That labor is not counted. Collection of, as I have mentioned, the water is not counted. So that's why the women have a major role. It's always a family business. We should never say the farming is a male business. Farming is a family business, where cultivating it, where also when we talk about pruning, when we talk about weeding, when we talk about showing, when we talk about cutting, when we talk about also storing. See, there is means not a farmer usually don't sell everything to a market. They usually keep something for their own consumption. That story, that is also done by women. Also, in some cases, farmer keep the product for a longer time so that after some time the prices goes up and then he sells. So that storing is also a part of women's work. Threshing is a part of women's work. All the hand threshing that has been done, it is done by women. It's now the machine has came, but otherwise it's done by women. And the major part when we talk about is biodiversity, when we talk about seed, conserving the seed for later use, for the next cultivation. That's also done by women. It's the woman that many studies has been done. Like when I still remember there is once there is means, that uh, everybody loves a good drought. It's a very good book, a very good book about Indian programs that has been initiated, policies, and how it has impacted the local ecology. So there's very good book that when uh, in drought situation, when this GMOs or the seeds that has been has been given by which is mainly given and produced by the multinationals has has really has destroyed because of less, because those type of seeds require a whole lot of water, and it got destroyed with the smaller droughts. But the seeds, the traditional seeds that has been preserved by the woman, that has survived. So that's how the role of women is not just only in the agriculture just to produce it, also to preserve it, also to keep it for the next generation. So that's why the women's biodiversity, when we talk about the biodiversity, so the woman's role is important. Similarly, in a climate, monoculture is nowhere is uh, will survive, because when a soil doesn't need just one type of root, it needs a different type of root to be bounded. And that's why the biodiversity is required. So that's why we say that in mountains and all the monoculture that has destroyed the whole mountains, the biodiversity that has kept the whole thing intact. Similarly, the woman has kept the biodiversity in the world still now. And yes, so that's why the farming, in any type of farming and all those, it is very important. There is another study that I have read long back. It is by Vivekananda Institute, Swami Vivekananda Institute. So there they have mentioned that, see, smaller practices, when we are talking about the myths and all those smaller practices, like uh, the honey collector, they don't take out the whole honeybee whole thing out. They just keep half of it so that it should grow. That's the traditional knowledge. You shouldn't just take out everything out. You should keep something to grow again. So the sustenance of nature, all this is coming from from these beliefs. So simple. Other, you talk about our different traditions also. It's also somehow is trying to preserve it, or trying to sustain it. So whenever we means, as science is progressing, somehow it doesn't mean the traditional knowledge is absurd. It has also came up with certain scientific knowledge. It's a generations of knowledge that has kept it. Might be it has got distorted. So we have to take out. We don't have to take out the whole thing. We don't have to take out the whole crop. We have to just take out the weeds. And we have to also, whenever we are going ahead with something that is new, we have doesn't mean that we have to destroy the traditional. We have to keep both of them together. So that's how the I think that we can sustain, because now the when we are talking about a climate change, we are talking about the sustenance, that this earth will not survive if we don't act now. This world means by 2100 to the 21,000, at least three the water level in the sea will raise by 3 meters. How much of land is going beyond below that? Other than that, the increase in temperatures and all those, that is also we are talking about. Women would be the most vulnerable, most impacted one. I just give a simple example of it. The resourceful will increase the temperature of their ACs, but the resourceless can't do it. If the temperature is 52 degrees centigrade, the resourceless and the poor have to stay in that. But might be the resourceful like us, we will just increase the temperature of the ACs and will stay inside. So it's same like what happens in COVID. The resourceful, they have stayed back in a house, but the resourceless has to go out. So the impact would be higher on the most vulnerable, and women being the vulnerable and the poorest, and the impact would be much more higher. So yes, I'm coming back again to that climate change issues. I think that after everything, I circle back to that issue, because I'm working on it, and I'm really uh, means my major agenda of is just include women in all the decision making. Otherwise, we can't survive. We can't really preserve this earth. We can't really take this world, sustain this world for a longer time. That's all I like to want to say here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, ma'am, for giving such a detailed information of of the behind the scenes of being of farming culture. Moving on to Somrita, you are a poet, and your interest in the history of food is also quite well known. So please tell us how ecofeminism as a concept has influenced your own writing. It would be wonderful if you could read out excerpts to explain how you have informed your audience about the unfair silencing of gender and ecology.
Thanks, Shorabhi. Food, women, and preservation of the environment are intrinsically connected. If you look at food cultures around the world, the more marginalized the person, the more is her tendency to preserve. So, if you look at meals that are, let's say, prepared by Dalit communities, and there is a lot of anthropological, sociological study on this, you will see that the Dalit community, for instance, consumes every part of an animal. No part is just thrown away as waste. No part is treated as offal, right? So they're going to use the intestines for a particular thing. You're not going to eat only the flesh of the goat kid. You will also eat the lungs. You will eat the brain. So every part of the animal is made consumable because this community is so marginalized, so vulnerable, so disenfranchised that they do not have access to richer meals, let's say. Similarly, if you think of women as the marginalized community in this whole food production scale or cycle or structure, you will see that women are the ones that are preparing the pickles. What is the idea behind a pickle? Preservation. That's how we started pickling. That you're going to add a lot of salt to a particular meat or a particular fruit or a particular vegetable so that you can preserve it. And this comes all the way from wartime history. That when there is no food left, you're going to pickle all your excesses. So Surashree was also talking about how the farmer is not just producing, but also keeping things, either for self-consumption or for later consumption. So who's responsible for the storage, right? If you look at how food is served, even just the plating of it, the more disenfranchised the community, the less the frills. So, this, behind this act or idea of preservation, you also have to look at the history of how marginalized or how vulnerable the community is. Because the more vulnerable you are, the more you identify with another person's vulnerability. In this case, the person could be the environment. Because you are the people that will be affected the first. You will be hit the first. So the onus is on you to sort of make sure that the temperature doesn't go above a certain level because you do not have air conditioning at home. The onus is on you to preserve the food in a particular way in earthenware pots. This Bengali concept we were talking about, all of us having this Bengal connection earlier before the thing started. The Bengali concept of panta bhat, where does that come from? You do not throw away the excess rice and you don't have a fridge. So you find ways of preservation. And most of this work, therefore, is being done by the vulnerable in the family, which in this case is the woman, right? So there is a deep history, because you mentioned in terms of food. If you're studying food, you have to look at the role that women play in food production and food preservation, and how that is intrinsically related to how we are looking at the environment around us, and how we are not seeing this environment as a giver but as a provider. There is a subtle difference between the two, right? I think Gandhi had said this, correct me if I'm wrong, but that there is enough in the world for everybody's needs but not enough for everybody's greed, right? So you cannot keep looking at this environment around you as something that you can constantly keep taking from, as something that will constantly be giving you. There is a difference between giving and providing. Providing is where you will get just what is necessary for you without becoming exploitative. Right, so that was food. But I mean, I would like to. I have an eye on the time, so I'll read something very brief. There was another poem which I had written for a TMYS issue. I think this was the last issue, so I definitely won't read that poem. That book is available, but I'll read something else that I've written. And I am very inspired by the root idea of the British Romantic poets. The idea that human beings can live in close harmony with nature. That there is this sort of string that is connecting all elements of nature. A string which is binding you to me, to the tree, to the plant, to the animal. And therefore, our attempt should be to take care of this string, to not cut it, to be gentle with it. Because this string will come back to you someday. So if you cut it off midway, you get affected as well. So I'm deeply inspired by that. So William Wordsworth wrote about the concept of the noble savage. The noble savage is this sort of male hermit-like figure that lives in close communion with nature. I give my noble savage obviously a feminist twist. My noble savage is a woman. And so I want to read to you something that I wrote about that concept. Give me just a second as I draw this poem. This one's called Eating a Mango in Calcutta. The Irish nun in finishing school taught me how to eat a mango in summer. Knife, fork, tip of my forefinger, thumb. But some women come from a different soil. They eat with hands, mouths, eyes. My mother, my mother's mother, my mother's mother's mother, women wild, women fertile, Women who dared to laugh, bleed, wear red. It is not eating, they said, until you've plucked the fruit, spat out seeds, spilled the juice, sucked it dry. We cannot eat ripe mangoes on hot afternoons in Calcutta without sweating. For eating is a verb, a metaphor that can birth love. Right, so yeah, I mean, I don't want to do the damage of explaining what the poem means, but um, at the core of my belief system, at the core of my writing, is this need to explore how men and capitalist structures, how patriarchal structures have forced their ideas on land and women, how they have forced patterns on land and women, and how they have tried to make land and women's bodies fit into narratives that benefit these structures, that keep these structures up, right? So I try to talk about ethical confusions in my work. I try to, through my work, counter in whatever little way possible this phallocentric principle. I try to earnestly propose the idea that we need female redeemers, that we need these, you know, female noble savages that will let women be, that will let the earth be, and not use every visible product as a consumable, potentially exploitable entity.
Thank you, Somrita, for reading out such a beautiful excerpt. Absolutely loved it. The imagery, so close to home imagery of the mango, but like using it for such a hard topic of capitalism. Moving on to Haimanti, many ancient indigenous groups lack their own script. There are still many communities where the language is predominantly verbal. So, do you see that as a disastrous thing towards documentation and research, or do you prefer to look at it as a way to preserve nature?
Thank you so much. And it was such a pleasure to hear Somrita's poem. And I was just thinking about it while this question just popped up. All right. So I just, in short, I'll try to acknowledge this thing that when a language dies, stories, songs, traditions, knowledge systems die along with it. So when you keep a language alive, you are basically keeping an identity, the culture, the tradition of a group of of people alive. So if a language is not transmitted from older to younger generation, its death is imminent, right? So when you were talking about some indigenous groups which do not have script, but the language is verbal. So in many cases we have seen, for example, in case of Thai Kumyang community in Assam, the language spoken by few people are mostly from age 70 to 80. Mostly they have died. So that means that this language would not survive more than 20 to 25 years if uh, no younger people would learn this language, would speak this language. This is going to die. So with that language will also die all the cultural symbols which are attached to it, the lores which are there, the poems, the songs, uh, anything which is attached to that language. This whole group of indigenous people will die a very slow death. So so there is certainly an urgency to revive the languages, because along with the death, every community will lose something or the other, even the ecological knowledge which they have, the knowledge system they possess. So when we talk about what are the solutions, um, do we see the solution as as a part of research or academia? Do we see this as a part of solution, that if we document it, if we research on it, maybe it will not be extinct? Maybe certain part of it would not be, because documentations, translations can help it in preserving the knowledge system, and it would get accessible to others beyond this particular community members. But in many cases, the elders or the community members don't approve of that. Why? Because they have their own coded knowledge systems, or their way of expressions, which they don't want to get manipulated, or the treatment of it, the objectification of it, they don't want it to happen. So yes, research and academia can be a medium, but only through extensive field work, and treating them as not an external factor, but only contribute in this field if the research is as elaborate as culture. So, and if we can only preserve the nature or the culture if we are trying to preserve the language as a mode of propagating their knowledge system. uh, the use of technology can be a means, in a way, to record the actual audiovisual cultural performances, but that would not again resurrect this particular language. So only if we are talking about resurrection of tribal languages, we would require young speakers. And so the awareness of the ethnicity and learning this language, um, going against the structures of this mainstream education system and mainstream economic structures. Multilinguality, if we start propagating multilinguality from the beginning, that can be really helpful. So um, I would like to state, there is Gond community who there is this festival, Koya Purnim, which happens every year in the month of Jan, Feb probably. And there they teach young people the Gond language, the Gondi language. And through that, they are trying to resurrect this particular language. Like there are other communities also who are working through it, through this kind of medium. Like the Thai Kamyang community, which I was talking about, they have started a week-long workshop, and they have started documenting their oral written materials related to history, tradition, stories, songs, manuscripts, rituals, and in their language, in Singapore and Thai Kamyang language. So that the children would gain this enthusiasm to learn that language. Interesting thing which Asur tribe have done is that they have started using mobile radio to transmit this local news and songs in their indigenous language. So to understand that, or to enjoy that, to get entertained by that, you will have to learn that language. So these are a few instances in which we can find that there are so many other ways in which we can resurrect these, not only language but also the knowledge systems, which in turn will benefit the ecology, benefit the women, and this would give the platform for people, those they are marginalized already, to speak. Their silenced voices would get a platform through this. So yeah, thank you.
Right. Thank you, Haimanti. With that, we come to the end of today's session. Thank you once again to Dr. Shome, Somrita, and Haimanti for this very insightful conversation and for your time this evening. I'm sure that everyone who have watched the show and who will be watching it in the future will take something from today's conversation. Please allow me to remind you that Tell Me Your Story is also calling for submissions on the story prompt, that is Women Without Names. Registrations are also open for the writing program season 13. We hope to hear from you soon. Till then, stay well, stay happy. Good night.
Thank
Good
you.
night. Thank you.
Good night.